Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Hafade Tero, and welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we are talking about cultural values in the Marianas, and our guest today is cultural anthropologist Dr. Isa Arriola. Isa, welcome.
Hafade, thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for being here, and especially thank you for being the scholar on this project by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. We had Liani Sarah Lou from the council on a few weeks ago talking about it. Inafa'måolik-Tipiyeew Matters. And you're here as the scholar for the project to share more of the survey results of what the community had to say. Mm-hmm. Could you start us off with a little bit of an idea about what this project is about?
Yeah, so we're really interested with this project in understanding more about how our community, our diverse ethnic community, sees their values and how they understand what others' values are as well. Right? So we wanted to really identify what these values were and see what aspects of those values people were most proud of, and also to address a little bit about conflict, right? Where we see conflict arising in these values. Is it between or within our own cultures, and how does that show up when people respond?
Great to have this opportunity to kind of see what the values are so that we can better understand each other in a way.
Right.
So I thought we would start off, before you tell us about the survey, giving our viewers and listeners an opportunity to think about some of the questions. Is that cool?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, so as we're going through, we want to invite you to think about, what does your cultural group value the most? Who are the role models that embody your cultural values? What aspects of your culture are you most proud of? Which of your cultural values do you feel are being challenged here in the Marianas? And which of your values do you feel are being respected? And those are just a few of many questions you asked in the survey. Tell us about the survey.
Yeah, so a lot of the previous literature that I was looking at when I was developing this survey that focused on values were basically saying things like, you know, sometimes it's hard to identify what those values actually are in your life, those cultural values, because they're so much a part of your daily life. They're a part of your own identity.
You don't even think about it.
You don't even think about them. Exactly. When you wake up, are you thinking, what are my values today? No, right? So this survey really was an opportunity to kind of bring those values to light and be intentional about asking you, you know, what are your cultural values and how does your culture play a part in the formation of those values? And let's think about it, right? Like, we want to know this information. And as it turns out in the survey, others not only wanted to share, but they also wanted to know, you know, what others were saying in the community. So I think this project has a lot of potential for further discussions down the line with how to apply the data that came through. And there's still a lot more discussion that we can have about what respondents said in the survey.
What I love about the survey that you've shared is that, you know, normally when people take a survey, they want to take 3 minutes and be done with it and get a chance to win their prize. But people really invested a lot of time and writing paragraphs in response. People are really into this.
That's right. Yeah, I was actually surprised myself because it's an online survey, so I was thinking the same thing, you know, a couple minutes. But as it turns out, over 320 people responded, 322, and they were actually spending more than 13 minutes answering the questions, the survey
really
questions.
Long.
That's really long.
Yeah.
I was thinking something more along the lines of 5, right? We're all really busy. Everybody has short attention spans nowadays. So I really wasn't expecting over 13 minutes, right? But it did give me a sense that people were really interested in not only learning, but sharing what they felt about values, and really trying to explore the questions and how they felt in relation to the questions. So yeah, I was impressed. I was impressed by how much time. There were even portions of the survey at the end where people could leave comments, and people were leaving comments, sometimes a few paragraphs of comments, you know, asking about, can you share the survey results and things like that, right? Or thank you for asking me about what my opinion is about values, right? We want to know more. So that was a surprise, but a good surprise.
Yeah, people are very interested in sharing, which is awesome. Before we get into what some of the results were, can you tell us a little bit more about who responded in majority?
Yeah, so the breakdown of the survey was about 65% Chamorros, 20% Refaloash, and 21% Filipino. So for the most part, the survey was reflecting broadly the perspectives of Chamorros, Refaloash, and Filipino participants.
But it was open to everybody.
But it was open to everybody, right. And a few others responded, right? But that was the kind of general ethnic breakdown. Most of the people were living on Saipan, so it was about 83%. And then Tinian, we got about 10% of the respondents, and 7% from Rota. So it was mostly Saipan focused.
Okay.
But still, we were able to hear some of the voices, you know, from
How about
Tinian
gender
as well.
and, excuse me,
So,
gender and ages?
Yeah, gender and ages. So there were 216, so it was mostly women actually, 216 women respondents, 97 male respondents.
So more than double the women.
Yeah, so this was, so that should also tell you something
Based
about
on
the
your
data.
cultural anthropology, why do you think that was? Or what might be some reasons for that?
You know, I don't know, because I haven't actually asked that question to the respondents, and we didn't capture, you know, the reasoning behind that data. But, you know, if I'm thinking about the role of women in our culture as cultural bearers, perhaps, and often at the forefront of a lot of these really important conversations in the community, maybe it has to do with that. You know, that's just me guessing. But that women's involvement reflected that knowledge and that interest, maybe.
Or concern, maybe?
Or concern, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It might have been because, you know, there was a conflict or something that was on their mind, and they wanted to express, you know, that in the survey results. But that's just my speculation.
Yes.
So. But,
possible theories for
possible
further
yeah.
exploration.
It could be anything.
Okay.
Maybe there's more women in the humanities network when we send the emails out. I don't know, but yeah.
Okay, and ages?
Yeah, so it was mostly a younger crowd. So 25 to 30-year-olds, there was about 30% of those that responded, and then 45 to 50s, around 20%, and then 55 and older, there were also about 20%. So it was a pretty good spread, but in general, it was targeting mostly, well, we weren't really targeting a younger audience, but that's who responded.
Which is also, in my opinion, a good thing, because it shows that the younger generation is interested in these topics and reflective on these topics, and want to discuss them.
I would have to agree. I also thought maybe it might be maybe older respondents, but also it could have been that the fact that the survey was online, right? That younger people responded more.
I think that had something to do with it.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so let's get to the meat of it. What did people identify as values their cultural group values the most?
So what I did was I kind of broke down the survey results as I'll talk more actually into male and female respondents, because that's how it corresponded to actually the breakdown in the forum that we had related to the survey. But for this first question, I'll just give you a really broad kind of understanding of what came back from the respondents. So in terms of what the cultural groups value the most, there was a lot of overlap between the different ethnicities that were, you know, the highest respondents that I mentioned. So, you know, women respondents mentioned the following terms, and I actually noted in this case the number of times that term came up throughout the survey, which was quite a lot. And the first one was, of course, respect. Well, I shouldn't say of course, but that's something maybe we might expect, right? Is respect. So that was mentioned 279 times throughout the survey. And then family came next at 125, and then language at 67. So Language was a really critical part of the respondents' answers about what they valued the most and where they feel their values were most respected and things like that. But this is something that people really value. The other things were elders, you know, the manamko, tradition, and then faith or church was also an important part of people's responses for what they felt their cultural group valued the most. And this was across the board between Chamorros, Rifalawas, and Filipinos. And in the survey, the male respondents had very similar answers. So they were saying things like respect, language ranked a little bit higher, family, elders. But one of the slight differences that I saw with the male respondents was that they were mentioning nature more. So not the natural environment, right? Whether it was like the beach or the water or things like that, or fishing and farming, things like fishing and farming. So other like subsistence practices, I guess you would say. So yeah, but in general, if you're really going to take the top three, it was respect, family, language, and respect, especially in the case of elders, respecting elders.
And I think it's important to note that shoot, and then the thought just went out of my brain.
The second question?
And it will come back to me.
It will come back.
Oh, God. We were talking before the show about messing up during the show. Well, there, it's happened.
It's all part of
it'll
it.
come back to me later.
We'll laugh through it. We decided we'd laugh through it.
All right. I'll let you know when it comes back to my brain.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on to role models. Who did they see as role models?
Right, so this question was getting people to kind of warm up to understanding the importance of how values show up in their life. And so this was the question that, you know, was asking, who around you really do you see these values embodied by? And women really responded, elderly manamko were the top answers, then ancestors, and then other experts like historians in the community, church leaders, island dancers and dance groups were a really important part of this conversation, cultural leaders and teachers, language instructors, and then males had really similar ones as well, but I'll read them out. So elderly and manamko also placed at the top. Ancestors, fishermen was also in there for men. Cultural practitioners, indigenous artists, and dance groups. So you're seeing the art showing up in both of the answers. And then also language teachers and practitioners. So these were the people that they really felt, you know, embodied the cultural values in their own community or in the Sinamay.
What would you answer to that?
I would say really similar things. You know?
What's your top one or two answers? Because I know for me it was like my aunts.
Yeah, I would say elders. I would have to say elders right up front. Aunts, uncles.
Yeah.
Yeah, people that in the everyday, right? That share the culture every day, or those that are around you that cook with you, right? Or speak or teach the language, you know, to you. Yeah, those are the people that come immediately to mind. But I also think the fact that dancers and language teachers came up was really key too, right? So these are people that have really like taken the lead with cultural transmission and really have like pushed that in the community in a lot of ways. And I think people really respect that and see that as an important part of our value system and also giving back. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I think I would agree.
And I know we're kind of rushing through. I feel like we're rushing through, but really it's sharing information so that we can each reflect personally on what our position would be or our opinion would be.
Right. Yeah, and keep in mind we will share the survey results too, so people will have time to sit with it later as the results come out and people can look through more of the numbers and things like that and see how they can relate to some of the quotes and stuff that the respondents shared. Yeah.
The quotes actually were really powerful.
I hope to share some of those, yeah.
So another one of the questions, what aspects of your culture are you most proud of? Oh, now I remember what I was going to say. When it came to identifying, a lot of these were short answers.
Yes.
Like you didn't say, pick one of these multiple choices, what are your values? Who are your role models? So this is really very much open-ended, what is coming from people's own you weren't leading them. You were making a conscious effort not to lead them.
Yes, absolutely. So we really tried not to, yes, push people in any particular direction or lead them to any particular terms, right? We wanted people to come to the survey just with the kind of course, it's never a blank slate, right? But just to come without any kind of preconceived notions for what we were looking for, and just to help people really identify, you know, in their own experience, how they felt about these cultural values. And I think that showed when people came to the survey. Yeah, so again, there wasn't any multiple choice questions, and there wasn't any
Too bad for you having to compile the results.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder on the back end to analyze that. But
okay, what aspects of your culture are you most proud of?
So for aspects of culture people were most proud of, a lot of the male respondents said things like respect and respect given to elders was something they were really proud to say they were a part of participating in. Language again came up. Things like humility, so that was a term that showed itself quite a lot. And then other things like jewelry. So male respondents talked about how cultural pieces of jewelry made them feel proud. The fact that we were a hospitable culture, sailing, music, and resilience also came up that people were proud of, that their cultures were resilient. And then food, of course, food's on there. And then common responses from women were also very similar, but I'll just share, there's some a little bit different. Respect given to elders, family. Fangingi or amen was like a very, very, really important part of this conversation. I think that showed up the most in terms of how people displayed their respect. And even in the Filipino culture, even though it's not fangingi, right, it's a similar kind of showing of respect to elders, and that was also brought up. So responsibility, hospitality, language, humility, history. And for women, they also talked about this idea of helping and care for others, giving, ancestors, food, preserving culture, dancing, and both mentioned pride. Just they're proud too that they're able to display these aspects, right, of pride in their culture. And pace of life was the last thing that was mentioned. So this kind of the way the pace in which we live our lives on the islands.
This is such a feel-good survey, really, when you think about these, you know, these results and what people are saying about how they feel about their culture and their culture here in the Marianas. You know, it's pretty heartwarming.
It is heartwarming. I felt that way when I was reading through it. I kind of felt a sense of my own happiness and pride in our cultures and in our diversity here on the island. Yeah, it's really, and it's great to see others expressing that too, right? To be able to see that others are writing about that too. So that gives me an idea about the way that we see the world that we're living in our islands, right? And that there is quite a lot of harmony and resolution in the way that we talk to and experience our values with others. Yeah.
So when we come back, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to move on to values being challenged and respected.
Yes.
All right. We'll be back after this break.
October is Sinamay Humanities Month, and it's a full month of celebration, kicking off with a proclamation signing on October 2nd. Young people share their expressions of culture at the Valentine's Singabao Poetry Competition on October 11 at American Memorial Park. Get your photos together. We're launching our digital archive community outreach. This month, we continue to honor Governor's Humanities awardees making a difference in our community. And on the 24th is our book launch for The Legacy of a Political Union by CNMI Covenant negotiator, the late Edward Pangilinan. For more information, visit nmhcouncil.org, and Happy Humanities Month.
Welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour. We are chatting with Dr. Isa Arriola about the survey Inafa'måolik-Tipiyeew Matters. Isa, we were talking about, of course, cultural values. Tell us a little bit about what respondents had to say about which of their values they feel were being challenged here in our community.
So the last two questions really kind of comprise the bulk of the qualitative data that came in from the respondents. And so what I did was I looked at all of the responses that came in, and I developed some themes basically, because there was a lot of information that came in.
Okay.
So as we mentioned earlier, right? So I developed some themes, 5 general themes, and I'll share that with you, and maybe a few examples as we go on. So one of the things that came up was that individuals felt that their culture or cultural practices were, their cultural values were most disrespected or challenged when their culture or their cultural practices were underappreciated in some way or misrecognized. So for example, being negatively compared to other people in the US, living in Saipan, for example, being teased for speaking with an accent, when local healers, for example, when their practices were not respected, so their healing practices or their medicine. The second theme was when individuals felt that their language was devalued. So this was a very important theme in the data that came through. For example, people would talk about how maybe when they were growing up, they were punished for speaking Chamorro in school, for example. Or Arriola. And the fact that language was not being taught enough, especially in public schools, they say, or in the community, just within the community at large, this was where people felt like their cultural values were really being devalued. And this is when language wasn't being respected. Then the third theme was when those considered quote-unquote outsiders, so this was a word that a lot of the respondents used, or non-locals, did not appreciate local culture or practices. So some of the examples included destruction, military destruction, developers not respecting the land, so when people felt like a developer was coming in, for example, and not adequately consulting with the community, that was one example. Tourists who don't understand Chamorro or Arriola culture, that was something that was shared. Or, for example, when off-islanders blame locals for the bad experiences that they have, maybe on a touristic experience. So these were actual quotes that people were sharing in the data. And then the last two I'll share is when individuals felt that aspects of their culture or identity were discriminated against or minimized or maybe even reduced. So some examples included when people talked about calling Chamorros or Arriola lazy, for example. So they were attuned to the kind of stereotypes that people were using, and that was really offensive to people. It really was disrespectful to our cultural values. And also people mentioned things like when Westerners are seen as more civilized versus local people. So when those kind of labels were placed on people, that's what respondents were reacting to. And then lastly, this broader theme of when land was not respected. And a lot of things were included in that category, but some of the examples included like when people improperly threw their trash and they didn't have a respect for cleaning it back up or picking it up. Improper development, again, of the land for monetary gain without asking locals, and also ancestral burial desecration, especially during these moments of development, right? So there was also a centrality of land in the themes, and this is where people really felt the most disrespected, that their cultural values were most disrespected.
That's really deep, and I almost feel like we could do another show just on those, exploring, those topics, but it's interesting to see that those are general themes that were kind of repeated throughout the respondents as something they're concerned about. And then the question is, what do we do about that?
Right.
Which is not the council's necessarily the council's not going to solve these issues, but it's good to articulate them.
Yes.
To keep the discussion going.
That's right.
What about the values people felt were being respected?
Yeah, so there were also a few themes, 5 here, actually not a few, more than a few. There were 5 themes that I developed here, and this is based on the respondent data, of course, too. So one of them was when if we're just talking about when people felt disrespected when the language was disrespected, it makes sense that this is what came up when people felt the opposite. Yeah.
Okay.
Because they say when language use was respected, right? So some of the examples included when people could speak Chamorro or Arriola in public events. So people were very clear about, they felt very respected when they could go into a public space and their language was actually being spoken in that space. when the language was rewarded during language competitions, for example. So there were a few of the youth that mentioned, they went to a language competition in Guam and they won. And that was a very, really important moment for them, right? And I thought that was a wonderful, response. And then also being able to sing the Sinamay anthem, again, in public spaces. So that was something people mentioned. Also, when elders were respected. So again, I think maybe this was like the theme of the day, right? Or the theme of the survey, which was respect, particularly of elders. And that's when people felt the most that their values were really respected in the community, especially in the case of fangingit and taking care of elderly and showing others you take care, but also learning from elders. And then when individuals could showcase their culture during cultural events or when people arrived to visit the island. So there was a sense that people really wanted to show their culture to others, not just keep it to themselves, right? They really felt proud when they were at Taga Festival, when they were at the Flame Tree Festival, if they could attend Festpac, for example. Pistang Pinoy came up, where diversity of Micronesian cultures were basically on display. That's where people were identifying, feeling really respected in their values. So, and then the last two things were during family gatherings and in the home, christenings, birthdays, weddings. That's where people really saw the community kind of coming together and their values being visible. And also during faith gatherings. So I mentioned that earlier, but people talked a lot about fiestas, praying together, and usually they were talking about the church, the Catholic Church. And this was how the respondents said, that I really feel like my values were on display when we all got together for a fiesta and we walked together or things like that. Yeah. So basically these moments where people really felt like they could kind of be themselves in these public spaces, right, with others. Even if there were differences, they felt that respect was coming through. Yeah.
So this survey and the wealth of it, I should say, is really just the beginning. It's not like, okay, thank you for your opinion, we're done. So I know the council is looking at different ways to use this information and to share this information further, forthcoming.
Right.
One of the first ways was a forum with some, with a group of, I would say, cultural representatives. Well, what did you think of the forum that was held a few weeks ago? What was the big takeaway for you from that get-together where these results were shared?
I really enjoyed the forum. It was an opportunity to hear from different cultural leaders, the youth, about what they valued, right? And how they were kind of responding to the data that they were seeing. And I got placed, we had different groups, right? Some based off of gender, and there was a youth group, and I got put into the youth group, and I joined the youth group. And I have to say, I was just thoroughly impressed by their analysis of what they were seeing. They were saying things like, our people are so intelligent. Like, look at these respondents, look at these responses that you're seeing in the data. It's so deep, it's so critical, it's so well-rounded. And so I really got to learn about their own experiences too with language, for example, right? So some of the youth were talking about how, it's a privilege now to know your language if you're Chamorro, for example, and whereas, a few generations ago, it might have been the opposite, right? Where you were taught more to speak English in public, right? And so they were dealing with a lot of those and talking through a lot of those changes that they were experiencing as youth in the community. And so I really think it was a fruitful forum. It was an intimate forum. But we were really able to dig into some of these really kind of emotional issues that surround, values. Again, if you don't think about them this intentionally, they can kind of slide by. But when you really start to think about them intentionally, it helps you to understand your own culture, your own biases that you bring into the conversation, but also the sources of pride and what makes you happy, what makes you tick, right? And where you're unwilling to compromise too. We also learn in our values, like, what are the bottom lines, right? Where do we not want to see compromise? And where can we compromise? So that's a good opportunity, I think, maybe for future conversations to take the kind of data that came through in this project and ask the question of what you were just saying, which was what now, right? How can we use this? Maybe how can we use this data to understand conflict resolution? Are there frameworks we can develop out of the data that came, from this that not just locals use, but anyone can use, right? And gives you a better sense of the cultural landscape in the CNMI.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really want to thank you for adding your expertise to this project, coming home to the Marianas and being a part of this. Is there anything, I almost hate to ask because the survey covers it. Is there anything else you want to add that maybe I didn't ask you about before we go?
No, just a big thank you, and a big thank you to the council for having me be the project scholar. Again, I'm the project scholar on this, but I learned so much, and I think these are really important spaces to open up, to have these conversations. I think we need them. I think the community craves them, and that's what I learned, right? That we need these opportunities to talk to one another about these really important issues, and to help us get through, again, even if it's tough, right? To help us use this information to be better conflict, what would you say? To have better conflict resolution. Peace builders, exactly. There we go. I love that. That's a much more beautiful way of saying it. Yes, peace. Peace builders, right? How can we participate in that kind of culture, right? And so for me, I just want to say thank you. Yeah, this has been a really great experience, and I really hope to see so many more conversations coming out of this survey. And I think there's a really good opportunity for that moving forward. So, and also thank you for having me today to have this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you. I've enjoyed getting to know you through this project and looking forward to more of what comes as a result of the survey and more work from you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isa. Our guest today has been cultural anthropologist Dr. Isa Arriola. She's the scholar for the project Inafa'måolik-Tipiyeew Matters, exploring cultural values. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.